Kate, what do you enjoy most about the work that you're doing now?
I like seeing change happen in real time. I am not inclined to kind of spend a lifetime doing research that may or may not be used. And I very much value that work. But I see my role, and the part that motivates me, as helping to mobilize knowledge and mobilize action and mobilize people and communities. And so, when we can see things like the policy windows open and we can advance action on collecting and using race-based data and sociodemographic data, for example, or investing in community agencies to lead healthcare responses during COVID. That comes at the very end of a long process of work by a whole lot of people. But I like being in that last mile. And really helping to get it across the finish line for people. And so that's sort of where my experience is, that's where my skill set is. And so now the other part that I'm really enjoying is teaching people about that, how to get something across the finish line, how to do that collaboratively. And so my teaching now at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health is more focused on policy and government relations and advocacy, where in the past I was teaching ecological public health, which I also love. But this one's really about, okay, how do we put this into action? How do we make it happen? And so I'm really loving sharing that. And I want to see more people being savvy about how they get this work done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such important work. Yeah. And now, Kate, you have 3 little ones. You have your twins who are 6, and then you have a 9-year-old. Yes. They're all at home. You sit on various boards. You teach at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at University of Toronto. How do you manage all your responsibilities, and how has it been for you, over this past year?
It has been very hard at times, and I mostly manage because my husband, Kevin, is the primary caregiver for our kids this year during the pandemic. And so he's leading them through their online schooling at home, and taking the brunt of the daily work. So it's really because of that support that I have from him that I'm able to do any of the work that I'm doing. And so I'm really, really grateful for that. It's also really hard. I get tons of interruptions from the kids. It's really hard to think, to be stuck in a single room, all those kinds of things. And to really still do a lot of the caregiving. So I'm still the mom. I'm still the one they're going to go to with their complaints and boo-boos and concerns. And there's a lot of emotional labor that remains, even if the time commitment is different. But I'm learning to say no to more obligations and more requests to do things, and to sort of prioritize my time differently so that I can manage it a little bit better. But I also I also thrive on being really busy. And so I'm okay with kind of taking on a lot of things if it feels like it's serving me at that time. And of course, all the hugs throughout the day don't hurt either.
Yeah. And between you and your husband, what advice do you have for other professional couples who are both ambitious, their kids at home? How do you negotiate those expectations and boundaries?
We've taken turns. I'm a big fan of that expression, you can have it all, but not all at once. So over the course of our lives together, we've taken turns kind of prioritizing different things, or, living in one place or another for different career reasons. And so at this moment, this is the one that made sense to us. Was to have him stay home for this year and maybe beyond, to help take care of them. So, I think it's for those people who are balancing both careers, it's a challenge, and I salute you for the work you're doing. And I think the main piece of advice is that we need to organize to collectively demand better and organize our society in a way that's more supportive, that recognizes child rearing as social reproduction, not just an individual choice. Because what we can see is we were never meant to do this alone. It's not really feasible. It's really very hard mentally, physically, socially, academically. And we really can't keep it up for that much longer. And so what we need is to really, when we're thinking about life post-COVID, really think about, what does it mean to raise children? Why do we do it? And how do we support communities and families to do that so they're not alone?
Right. And how would you suggest we support families and communities?
Well, some of the basic things are around affordable childcare for everyone, and that is accessible during a pandemic and in a time when childcare workers and teachers and others can be prioritized for safety and for vaccination, and the appropriate supports and so on are in place to ensure that children get to benefit from that village of support. So, that's one of them. I think, many of the things that go into a feminist recovery are required when we think about care work generally. So that's caring for children, but also caring for our elders. Which has also been a significant issue throughout COVID in long-term care, for example, and for isolated people at home. The informal caregivers that are so under-supported. There's a huge economy of care labor that's not factored into the current policy regime that we have. And so those are some of the things that we do. I think looking forward, if we value care work, as well as it should be valued economically and socially and politically, that would be a really good start to providing the kind of sustainability we need to make sure we can all get through something like this again.
And what can we do as the public in terms of supporting the change or making helping change happen, because change often takes such a long time. And there is so much damage done, already, or the consequences. We
have a lot of work to do for those people listening who are healthcare leaders and members of the healthcare system to really rebuild and re-earn trust with communities, because I think people feel let down by many of their systems, particularly people who are already facing health inequities and challenges in the social determinants of their health. So there's a lot of work. There's absolutely a lot of work that has to happen on the institutional side. But for those of us on the public side, we really need to continue sticking together. Canadians don't tend to organize. We don't tend to mobilize the way people in other countries do when change is needed. And so that's something we need to continue working on to advocate for, to demand the kinds of changes that we think are needed to support ourselves and our communities. And then a lot of my work is about social prescribing and the way that we can do a lot of that work even in the absence of institutional supports. So we do need to do that informal caregiving and support for our neighbors and communities and friends. We need to reconnect if we've become disconnected from our communities, and healthcare systems can help with that. We need to start kind of rebuilding and remembering that we do have a lot of capacity as communities, and that we can take turns carrying the load, and also resting and letting ourselves be carried when that is necessary. And that's hard for high achieving people to hear and to do, but it's absolutely necessary if we're going to be able to do this in the long haul.
Right. And you mentioned Canadians are not quick to mobilize and act. What are some of the reasons?
They're probably deeply rooted in our colonial history, as many of our current healthcare structures are too. That, we're not a revolutionary society. We're made of people who were maybe escaping unrest in their home countries. And we are an incremental change sort of culture. And that's not conducive necessarily to the big and rapid changes that I think are going to be needed. But that said, the slow build and work toward that, it does pay off. So even when it seems to be taking forever, when the policy window's open, you can take advantage. And we have seen during COVID, absolutely the opportunity to make rapid change. We saw an overnight switch to virtual healthcare, for example, something that people had been trying to do for many years, and thought might take many more years. So it's possible. It's possible. And that gives me a lot of hope that we can, if we decide collectively that something is a priority, it's never impossible, and it can happen very quickly. So I think even for things that seem to be taking forever, it's worth continuing and keeping it up, and addressing some of those colonial levers and legacies, decolonizing healthcare, not just by and for Indigenous people, which is where the real leadership for this is coming from, but also for the whole country, to kind of remember that some of these structures were formed in a time and place that just is not that relevant to who we are now, and that it's okay to make that up for grabs and to make changes that are in the interest of a sustainable and equitable system that we need now and in the future.